VW announces a large number of Tesla beating activities that they'll be implementing over the next 3 or 4 years, all the way extending to 2030. After their announcement, VW stock price jumped as much as 29%, and Tesla's stock price actually fell, is what we covered today. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy our show and would like more information for better investing and trading, please sign up on Patreon for very, very good trading related ideas that might be helpful to you on a daily basis, weekly basis, etc. We also want to say if you enjoy this show, please take time to like and subscribe. So today was a really interesting day because Vw Audi announced a series of initiatives designed to be rolled out over the next 8 or 9 years that calls for them to start beating Tesla by 2025. And so for us, this was very strange because whether it's Mercedes-Benz, Daimler, or whether it's GM, or whether it's now Audi, it seems like at least every 6 or 8 months, there's a new entity that's going to spend large amounts of money to both capture and defeat Tesla. And I guess I'm very surprised at how this process is working, because you have some world famous giant companies that are having a hard time dealing with Tesla, but coming up with sort of crazy plans on how to do so. So I wanted to sort of take a look at some elements of what we're talking about here. The first element was that it was indicated, or in no particular order, there was a mention of the fact that Vw Audi would put together their own software company, would allow them to build their own platform and therefore address the software needs of all their products in this space. Now, that is a good idea. The challenge, though, is I just, for some reason, had this number in mind. One of the heads of the Porsche brand under the Audi umbrella made a comment where he said, look, there are 13 million lines of code that actually drive that drive the 911. Now, what's interesting about this is that he was kind of proud at the number of lines of code that were being written and used within that car. The contrast to this is what was stated by Elon Musk, where he indicated that when it comes to lines of code, one of the goals of Tesla is, can we reduce 2 lines to 1? So they actually give out awards to their engineers for getting problems done in 1 line rather than 2. So I think this was really interesting because this sort of highlights the fact that when you have a programmer whose core competency is writing software and he's running the company, how he thinks about software is a little bit different than how someone who's trying to manage engineers and you aren't necessarily an expert in that space. So I thought this sort of exchange between the two companies was illustrative of the challenges that are being now had by the folks at Porsche Audi / VW. I'll remind you also that it was announced by Bob Lutz about 3.5 years ago that it was no problem. There was going to be a complete destruction of Tesla by not only VW, but GM and all of the other large companies that were going to announce and deliver vehicles. And that was 3.5 years ago. And that was promised absolutely right now. Now, we can go through a list of problems that these companies are having, which are still the case now and will still be the case 3 years from now when VW is supposed to take over. The first problem is no charging network. VW may have charging at individual stores, perhaps, but it actually doesn't have a global charging network to service those that may not want to buy a huge battery in the car and can go from facility to facility if they choose to purchase a vehicle with a smaller size battery when they're on a longer trip. So it reduces range anxiety. VW does not have a charging network. Number two, uh, one of the techniques that Elon's used is open sourcing. So they're actually, they have millions of people around the world helping to identify bugs and fix software, et cetera. And that's one of the reasons the software underpinnings of Tesla are not, if you will, completely proprietary. It's built on top of open source software, and it allows for better software operation. Number three, batteries. Now, VW has indicated that they're looking at doing solid state batteries. They're also looking at other battery form factors within which their 6 new battery factories are going to be prepared to handle. Now, I find this really fascinating because how can you plan on defeating Tesla if you're going to come up with a battery form factor that can take as long as a year to confirm that it works, and then you can take it out of the lab and start putting it on the road to make sure it's ready for implementation within your vehicles? So, yeah, they may come up with a battery factor, but as Mr. Fisker pointed out, anytime you come up with a new form factor, it can take 2 or 3 years to work out all the bugs in real live situations. And then from there, you got to scale manufacture the solution you come up with. So, from what VW is telling us, they actually don't really know what the form factor yet is going to be, but they're saying they're going to have 6 battery fabs or battery factories producing these new form factors in huge scale quantities that will easily defeat Tesla. Good idea, it sounds like, but the problem is you really need to have something that you can claim will work first before you actually have it defined as how your company is going to successfully run for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And then the other thing that's strange here regarding this is right now, VW is the largest foreign manufacturer in China. As Tesla has entered and started selling large numbers of first Model 3s and now Model Ys that are built in China, they're already selling, US vehicles into China successfully. But now that they have those factories inside China, the biggest loser of market share is actually VW Audi. So, and this is part of the sort of luxury orientation of foreign manufacturers that's in China. And for several companies, especially Daimler, as well as BMW, China is actually their largest market. And what's happening? Tesla's destroying them because a lot of their buyers have now switched over to Tesla and continue to do so in very large quantities. So I so to further sort of follow this theme, as Tesla enters with its new plant in Berlin, we will have further illustration of the fact that there's this problem happening, which is as Tesla focuses on cost and quality of execution combined with other value propositions like the charging stations that they have throughout Europe, it's quite clear that VW and Company and Daimler-Benz and BMW and GM and the Chinese manufacturers are all seeing this phenomenon where there are large companies that are making announcements or implementing solutions. But the problem they're having is that there's this thing about the consumer, which is you can announce as many cars as you want. But the problem you have is if consumers are not buying your product because its value proposition doesn't meet or exceed what Tesla offers, it creates a problem. So perhaps the biggest what is going to happen here that's going on is with Tesla's new battery form factor and the building of the battery into the frame of the vehicle, we're now starting to see the seeds of how Tesla will get its cars down into that 25,000 per range. And once they get down into that range for their vehicles, it'll be very difficult for other companies to follow them down there. One, because they don't have the battery form factor to begin with, that is the 4680. Two, they have the disadvantage of not building into the frame as Tesla is planning to do for that vehicle. So we now have another problem where I've been articulating this for a while, which is Tesla will be able to sell vehicles at what is a cost for other manufacturers. And let's not forget that Tesla is selling directly to customers. So there's a 10 to 20% profit margin that has to be marked up on competitor cars because of their dealer network. So this is just a warm up to a large number of issues that are lurking not only for VW, but also for Daimler-Benz, also for all of the other OEMs around the world. Now, if you look as a precursor of where things might end up, let's take a look at China. If you combine all of the competing manufacturers, Tesla, if you combine all the Chinese manufacturers against Tesla, Tesla's selling out those folks within their own country at least 2 to 1, possibly 3 to 1 on vehicles, particularly now that Model Y is being made available. So what all this means then is that I believe this is a sign of desperation that has gotten some good run for the folks at Audi VW. The problem is that they've been announcing every 2 years a complete destruction of Tesla as part of their plan, and none of those plans have worked out. So the question then becomes, wait a second, when are we going to see what really happens? And I believe that it's easy to announce things, but a lot harder to execute it. The one other note that we wanted to make here is there are already problems popping up with the plans that VW Audi has, particularly for batteries. And one example of that is because SK Innovation is one of their partners, it's been announced that they'll only be allowed to operate for another 2 years before they're banned for 10 years because of stealing LG's technology. So those factories that were nearly done, et cetera, may be in operation for a while, but may have to be shut down if a deal isn't done between the two companies. So all in all, what I'd have to say is that I think it's a good idea that Audi's making these announcements. I think, they've been showing vehicles on the road, be it the Taycan or the IDE, that illustrate that they're working hard to compete with Tesla. They've run into some software problems. They're still having high-end customers having a hard time finding charging efficiencies or facilities that are consistent with best practices that they can get their cars charged up at. So I guess what I'd have to say is that the one thing that this vaporware process can do, and Bob Lutz was trying this, as well as now it seems that VW Audi is trying it, is that if in fact you make a giant announcement and you articulate to customers all the things you're going to do to be competitive in the space, it's actually possible that you can freeze customers that might be saying, I'm planning to go to Tesla, but wait a second, if you guys are going to take this seriously, I may delay my buying decision so that it gives you a chance to deliver a product that would be competitive. So the final idea here that I'd like to cover on this whole thing is a concept called marginal utility. So in economics, what tends to happen is customers have a basket of issues that influence their buying decision. And one of the problems with Tesla for the other manufacturers is if Tesla gets up to 1, 2, 3 million vehicles a year before you see significant competition, you could end up with what we've been talking a lot about, which is something called the network effect, meaning that one of the problems you can have is that so many consumers and people they know already have this solution, i.e. Tesla, and it's working well for them. There ends up being very little differentiation room for those new products compared to what they could just get from Tesla. So in order to have a dramatic difference that causes customers to move away from Tesla, something like, a brand new battery that does things that Tesla can't is what you need in order to significantly change what occurs. One of the vaporware logics is by presenting this idea that, oh, don't bother with Tesla, wait a couple of years and we'll be right there with a solution that's just as good. Great idea, and it has worked in other realms of software, et cetera. But the problem is that the more Teslas that hit the road, the more charging stations are available, the more people have conversations about how the solution works. It leaves very little marginal utility room for competing entities to enter the space successfully. So my conclusion on this whole thing is that if the folks at VW elect not to construct their own charging facilities globally within the next year and a half, it's my belief that Tesla's number of factories and number of vehicles built and sold each year will get so large that we'll start to see the phenomenon we've seen with cell phones, where you end up with two or three players. In the case of Apple versus Android, they sort of dominate the smartphone business, even if there are smaller competitors elsewhere. So for these entities that are unable to get batteries in large quantities and the rest of what consumers want to see in terms of charging abilities, et cetera, I would say that they're all in danger. And so instead of this looking like strength, the announcement being made by Vw Audi, I really think it's showing a sign of weakness, that they're nervous that they have to try to find a way to freeze consumers from purchasing solutions from Tesla until they have an opportunity to deliver product solutions at each price tier and each performance tier. And so the other sort of note here is that take a look at what happened with the Bolt from GM. Their strategy was to lose $10,000 on each car, and the goal was to snatch buyers away from Tesla because they could come in at a price point much lower than the Model 3. The problem that happened was that even though you were seeing a vehicle $10,000 to $15,000 cheaper than the Model 3, consumers were still going to Tesla. So what this suggests to us then is that you could have the situation where Audi actually puts out an okay vehicle, but the consumer sense of the value proposition Tesla offers results in an inability for certain large entities to compete, not because they haven't finally delivered a decent product, but because the buying public has now defined what it is that they want in a vehicle, and what they're getting from Tesla completely fits their needs to the point where they're not interested in other solutions. So again, this would be a good reason why you want to try to do vaporware as a way to shut them down. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the next few days in the stock market, because I think people will think the presentation through and come to their senses and realize that you actually have factories sitting there running, producing batteries, producing cars for Tesla, while VW has big announcements, but they're not showing strength in the space in which Tesla is strongest. So we look forward to hearing your comments on this. Wanted to note to you, we do have some shares of SpaceX as well as Coinbase in the pre-IPO zone. Please drop us a note at Teslafaninsight on Facebook in the private area if you'd like to discuss that. I also want to get into our health tips for today. Don't forget your 25 leg lifts per leg to strengthen quad muscles, reducing the chance of knee issues. Also wanted to encourage you to consider a 2-5 or any of the other fasting diets as a way to improve your health process. Third, if you're going to do lovemaking, consider having a very small salad or something of that ilk in order to reduce the amount of blood flow going to your stomach, which is now available to other portions of your body. We also wanted to encourage you to consider 30 30 or better SPF on a daily basis to avoid skin cancer. And then we also wanted to encourage you to consider fried foods no more than once a week. And then finally, that was from our kidney doc. And then finally, do not go to bed within 4 hours eating, preferably letting the food digest completely, or a minimum of 2 hours, which allows your body to digest the food so you don't get acid reflux or other types of cancer. At any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. Tschüss, German. Au revoir, French, Hebrew, Choda Hafez, Farsi, Strasiche, Russian, Ni Hao Ma, Chinese, Konbanwa, Japanese, Hey Do, Swedish, good day, our friends in Australia. And in Jamaica, we say, enough respect, walk good. Looking forward to constructive comments on this. And we look forward to our next conversation.